modernists, in the last 100 years especially, saying that the rosary is of more human origin than divine origin, that we just kind of made it up. No. One of the greatest popes ever, Pope Leo XIII, said that the rosary is of more divine origin than human origin. It was made by God. He crafted it. He forged it together. And at a specific moment in time, he unsheathed it and gave it to his woman so that she could then give it to her chosen servants. So it starts with the angelic salutation. When the Archangel Gabriel comes to Our Lady and says, "Hail, full of grace." And then the other component, St. Elizabeth's greeting to Our Lady, "Filled with the Holy Spirit. Blessed are you among all women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." And then we get the beautiful prayer from the lips of our Lord himself, the Our Father. What better prayer, could there be? And it slowly grows, and they don't come together till centuries. The Hail Mary prayer wasn't developed until the 6th and 7th century of the church, and a prayer in the liturgy. People were already praying the Our Father prayer, but the Hail Mary, it took time to come together. And then there was a certain thing in the church, in the divine blacksmith's workshop, of prayer beads. Did you know that St. Jerome, the great biblical scholar, used prayer beads to pray on? Not the rosary, no. But there were many people during that time that used little pebbles or stones, and they would do their penance, their penitential prayers. Irish monks and others that would use this form to make sure they got their number of prayers in. And eventually they developed this, a beaded form of doing it. But none of these things had come together. They were slowly developing the antecedents of what would be the components of making this sword. There was even something that came into existence called the Marian Psalter. I don't know if you've heard of that. But there were, back in those times, when the monks came to pray the divine office, if they didn't know Latin, they couldn't do it. So many of them started to substitute the Our Father prayers, and they would pray 150 of them, and became known as the Pater Noster beads. And then the Cistercians, and their great love for Our Lady, with like St. Bernard of Clairvaux and others, they said, why don't we make a parallel also to honor the Virgin Mary? So we'll pray the Hail Marys on those beads as well. That became the Marian Psalter. But it wasn't a weapon. It didn't have any mysteries attached to it. It was something for monks who did a devotional form who couldn't participate in the Latin monastic hours. It wasn't for taking it out into the streets for an evangelical tool. Not yet. But then the 13th century came. And there was a lot going on in the 13th century. I'll start by telling you about a particular woman in Spain who was pregnant. Her name was Juana of Anza in Spain. She would become Blessed Jane of Anza. When she was pregnant with her son, she had a vision. And it's a weird vision. She was pregnant and she saw herself giving birth to a dog. Yikes, right? Yeah, totally. I just saw some of your faces. You're like, wait, what? I know, whack. It was trying to portray something else. She didn't know what it meant at the time. Well, when she gave birth to her son, she named her son Dominic. Dominic would grow up to be very skilled in being able to speak. And so he became a priest. He became an Augustinian canon, which is basically a glorified diocesan priest back at those times. He was a diocesan priest who lived a certain way of life around the cathedral. In his time, there was a heresy in the church called Albigensianism, which was basically a dualistic understanding of life. Spiritual things, good. Material, fleshly things, bad. Therefore, Christianity, bad. Why would God become flesh? And it denied the incarnational truths of Christianity, and very specific ones. The birth of Jesus Christ, that Mary, was a virgin. All those fleshly realities they denied. Well, this particular priest, we'll call him Father Dominic at that point, he went on a preaching campaign to go against them. And he thought with his ability to speak, he'd be able to conquer them easily. But he wasn't able to. And he was pretty bummed out. So he went into the forest to do like a retreat in southern France. And he prayed and he asked heaven, I need help, I need help. And that is when tradition says, popes have said, Our Lady came to him and said to him, preach my Psalter. Remember the Psalter? was already in existence, but it was not the rosary. It was not a spiritual weapon. It had no meditations attached to it. The mendicant orders were about to be born, and they would take the monastic psalter out of the monasteries into the streets as an evangelical tool to bring the heretics back and to bring others to the truth. So when he was given this commission by the Blessed Virgin Mary, she told him that it would be a weapon. Some accounts say that she used the word battering ram against heresy. He went out and he converted so many people, brought people back to the faith. And then he founded a community, the Order of Preachers, to join him in this and to spread all around the world, the Dominicans. And you know what they became known as in Latin? Because, back then, the Latin phraseology, Dominicanis, the dogs of God. That was the vision that his mother had. That's why whenever you see an image of St. Dominic, you almost always see next to him a dog with a torch in its mouth. Because when she had that vision, the dog had a torch in its mouth, and it leaped out of her womb, and it went throughout the whole world, lighting the world on fire with the saving truth of Jesus Christ. So he founded the Dominicans, and they started to win souls back in an unbelievable pace. And then he died in 1221. And this still went by the name of the Psalter. It wasn't yet quite known universally as the Rosary. That would come, but it was called the Psalter still at that time. You know who was not a huge fan of this? Satan. He knew what had been unsheathed, that the queen had been given the weapon, and now it was in the world, and he was going to go on the attack. And he did. He did. Do you know what happened in the next century in Europe? The Black Plague, the Black Death. 1/3 of Europe died. Do you know how many people that was? Estimates are that it was as many as 25 million people died. Whoa. Why? Yes, it was because of rats infested things and so forth, and it spread, but there was a spiritual component. These are not my words, so don't write me up in the paper and say, Father says the plague is because we're, St. Louis de Montfort said it. Centuries later, in The Secret of the Rosary, he would say that the Black Death, the Black Plague in Europe in the 14th century was a result of Satan seeking to get rid of this. The weapon had been unsheathed. He wanted to destroy all documentary evidence associated with it. And by the way, this is a frequent tactic of the evil one. When some new form of devotion is given to the world, he will seek to burn the original documents. Look at almost any mystic and visionary who's given a chaplet of divine mercy, for example. St. Faustina burned her first version of her diary, and so many others. If you do the historical research, you'll see that Satan goes on the attack, and he did. St. Louis de Montfort says that he went on the attack because he knew that these infestations would go into convents, monasteries that had libraries, and those places would have to be burned because they were infested with the plague, and they were burned. They were. So many lost. And we don't have much of the original documents at all associated with this. As a matter of fact, we don't have one single word from St. Dominic. Did you know that? The guy founded the Order of Preachers who speak. We don't have one word historically preserved from the mouth of St. Dominic. Not one. Are we therefore supposed to think that he never talked? Of course not. He preached, that's what he did. He founded the Order of Preachers, the dogs of God. Satan was on the hunt for this. But when St. Dominic had died in 1221, he sent some of his brothers, right before his death, to England. That was a key move. Because you know what England became known as during that century of the Black Plague? The Dowry of Mary. You can look all this up historically. Why was it called that? For many reasons. One of which was this went off of mainland Europe to go for safekeeping during the plague that struck mainland Europe. Oh, it hit England too, but it ravaged mainland Europe. During the 14th century in England, colleges were founded where the presidents and founders of the colleges mandated that this be prayed by the students and the president. They would put these extra ones in little bowls at the entrances of churches. So if people didn't have their own, they could take one to use. The dowry of Mary, kept safe offshore during the Black Death. So after that was over, in the next century, the 15th century, there was a renewal movement happening. And my brother friars here could tell you about this. The observant reform movement, where after people survived, many religious communities that were founded the century before or a century and a half before wanted to get back to the original charism of their founder, recover that original fire and everything. Franciscans were the first to start doing it. Then you had Dominicans follow, and you had a whole bunch of Servites and a whole bunch of others. And heaven started to speak to certain individuals about different forms of rosaries particular to their order. So you had the Bridgetine Rosary, given to St. Bridget of Sweden. You had the ancient Servite Rosary, which, by the way, was also founded during the century of St. Dominic. How many of you have heard about Cabejo, Our Lady of Cabejo, right? We'll get into that a little later. It's an ancient rosary, the Seven Sorrows of Our Lady Rosary. It was founded in the 13th century, right after Our Lady gave St. Dominic the original one. Well, the Servites said, we need to recover that. St. Bridget of Sweden was given visions. She was given a form of a rosary. And the Franciscans, in the year 1422, this is Franciscan history here, was given to a novice named James, who was kind of bummed out because in the novitiate, he was not able to make wreaths to crown Our Lady with roses. And he felt disappointed that he wasn't able to do that. So Our Lady came to him, and she gave him a Franciscan form of a rosary, the Franciscan corona, the Franciscan crown rosary. And she specifically let him know that it was to be an understanding of crowning her with roses. And then it kicked in that all forms of Marian Psalters, whether they were the Dominican, Servite, Bridgetine, Franciscan, would be known as rosaries. That's when it got the name. So although it was originally given to St. Dominic, the church is perpetually grateful to the Franciscans for that vision given to that novice in the year 1422. And as the century progressed, the Dominicans fully surrendered to this movement, and one of them, living in Brittany, like the shore, northwest France, closest you can get to England, he started to receive visions, but he was an academic. And academics sometimes aren't too friendly towards these kinds of things. And so he thought, well, I'm involved with my books. I don't have time for this. And he was receiving visions, the tradition says, from Jesus, Mary, and St. Dominic, the founder of his community. And they were asking him to revive the Dominican rosary, the father of all rosaries. But he was reluctant until Jesus said to him on one occasion, I love this. Jesus said to him this is powerful stuff. He said, the world is filled with ravenous wolves, and you, unfaithful dog, know not how to bark. Yikes. How'd you like to be on the receiving end of that? Right? That's God saying that to you. It seems harsh, but it's not. Why would he call him an unfaithful dog? Because he's a Dominican. You are a son of St. Dominic. You are a Dominicanis. Why are you not barking against the wolves? You're in your books. You've got this weapon. So that's when he kicked it in gear. And he began to renew this, and he wrote books about it. And he renewed the confraternity that St. Dominic founded, even though it may have gone by a different name at the beginning, as an association of prayer. And there's actually, in my book, I have the references of how he set one up when he went to Rome, St. Dominic. He renewed this, the Confraternity of the Rosary, and people started joining. And another Dominican brother founded another one in 1475, Father Jacob Springer, and it spread everywhere, everywhere. But guess who wasn't liking it? Satan.